The riverbank was a desolate stretch of gray, where the water churned with a restless hunger, its surface rippling under a sky heavy with November clouds. The air was sharp, laced with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the wind howled through the skeletal trees lining the Willow Creek River, a forgotten artery winding through the small town of the same name. Eleanor Grayson, 78, stood trembling on the muddy edge, her frail frame swallowed by a threadbare wool coat that had seen better decades. The coat, once a deep navy, was now faded to a mottled gray, its hem frayed from years of wear. Her gray hair, once meticulously pinned into a neat bun, hung in loose, tangled strands, whipped about by gusts that carried the river's chill. Her hands, gnarled and spotted from decades of scrubbing floors, sewing clothes, and cradling her daughter, clutched a small cloth bag, a humble relic containing her life's meager treasures. A few crumpled dollar bills, a tarnished silver locket with her late husband's faded photograph, and a creased picture of her daughter, Clara, at age 6, smiling with a gap-toothed grin. Eleanor had come to this lonely spot, a half-mile from Willow Creek's Main Street, at Clara's insistence. The call had come that morning, Clara's voice clipped and impatient over the phone. "We need to talk, Mother. Not at your place. Too many years. Meet me by the river at 4. Eleanor had sensed the tension, the undercurrent of resentment that had grown over the years like a weed strangling a garden. She'd hoped this meeting might be a chance to mend things, to reach the daughter who seemed to slip further away with each passing year. Now, standing on the slick bank, her worn shoes sinking into the mud, she wasn't so sure. Clara stood a few paces away, her silhouette sharp against the gray horizon. At 42, she was a stark contrast to her mother, tall, angular, with dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin, giving her face a severe, almost predatory edge. Her hazel eyes, which once sparkled with mischief, were now cold, glinting like the river's surface under the overcast sky. She wore a black coat, pristine and tailored, a symbol of the life she'd clawed her way into, a life of modest success as a real estate agent, far removed from the poverty of her childhood. Her hands were shoved into her pockets, but her posture was rigid, her jaw set as if bracing for a fight. The argument had begun an hour earlier in Eleanor's cramped apartment, a second-floor walk-up with peeling wallpaper and a sink that perpetually dripped. It had started, as it often did, over money. Eleanor had broached the subject delicately, her voice soft as she sat at the Formica table, a cup of weak tea cooling in her hands. "Clara, I hate to ask, but the pharmacy raised the price on my insulin again. It's nearly $200 a month now. And my pension," she trailed off, her eyes pleading, knowing the request would spark Clara's ire. Clara had leaned back in the chair, her arms crossed, her lips a thin line. "Again, Mother? You think I'm made of money? I got my own bills, my own life. You can't keep doing this." Her voice had risen, sharp and accusing, filling the small kitchen with a tension that felt like a storm about to break. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't need it," Eleanor had said, her voice trembling. "I've always tried to make do, Clara. You know that." But Clara hadn't wanted to hear it. The conversation had spiraled, old wounds tearing open. Eleanor's sacrifices, Clara's resentment, the years of unspoken grievances. Clara had stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum. "I can't do this here," she'd snapped. "Let's go to the river. No one will bother us there." Eleanor had agreed, hoping the change of scenery might calm her daughter, might open a door to reconciliation. Now, standing on the bank, she realized how naive she'd been. "You're always taking, Mother," Clara said now, her voice low and venomous, cutting through the wind's howl like a blade. "Always needing something. Do you know what it's like to carry you? To drag you through life when I'm barely holding on myself?" Eleanor's lips parted, her breath catching in her throat. The words were a punch to her chest, each one laced with a bitterness she'd felt but never fully understood. "Clara, I've never asked for more than I needed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I raised you alone, gave you everything I could, everything." Clara's laugh was sharp, bitter, a sound that made Eleanor flinch as if struck. You gave me a childhood of scraping by, of hand-me-down clothes and empty promises. You think I owe you for that? For a life where I was always the poor kid, the one with holes in her shoes? The accusation stung, slicing through Eleanor's heart. She had been 22 when Clara was born, a young widow after her husband, Thomas, died in a factory accident that left her with nothing but a newborn, a pile of debts, and a grief that never fully faded. She'd worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses by day, waitressing by night, to keep food on the table. She'd sewn Clara's dresses by hand, her fingers pricked bloody from late-night stitching. She'd stayed up helping with homework, reading library books by lamplight to spark Clara's imagination. She'd shielded her from the world's cruelty as best she could, even when it meant going hungry herself. But Clara, it seemed, remembered none of it. To her, Eleanor was a chain, a weight anchoring her to a past she despised. "I never meant to burden you," Eleanor said, her voice trembling as she took a step forward, her shoes slipping slightly in the mud. "I just thought, we're family, Clara. We're all we have." Clara's eyes narrowed, her hands emerging from her pockets to ball into fists at her sides. "Family," she spat, the word dripping with disdain. "You're not my family. You're a leech. You've been draining me for years, and I'm done." The words hung in the air, heavy and final, like a door slamming shut. Eleanor's heart ached, not just for herself, but for the daughter she'd lost somewhere along the way. She remembered Clara as a child, her laughter filling their tiny apartment as they baked cookies, her small hands sticky with dough. She saw her at 10, clutching Eleanor's hand during a thunderstorm, her eyes wide with trust. She recalled the teenage Clara, defiant but still seeking her mother's approval, her dreams of escaping Willow Creek scrawled in a notebook she thought Eleanor never saw. Where had that girl gone? When had she become this stranger, her heart hardened by years of resentment Eleanor couldn't fully grasp? "Clara, please," Eleanor began, reaching out a trembling hand, her fingers shaking not just from the cold but from the weight of her daughter's rejection. Her eyes, clouded with cataracts but still sharp with love, searched Clara's face for a flicker of the girl she'd raised. But before she could finish, Clara stepped forward, her face contorted with a rage that seemed to erupt from some deep, hidden place. Her hands shot out, slamming into Eleanor's chest with a force that belied her slender frame. The push was sudden, brutal, and Eleanor stumbled backward, her feet slipping on the slick bank. A gasp escaped her as she fell, her body hitting the water with a sickening splash that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet. The river was colder than she'd imagined, a shock that stole her breath and seared her bones. The current grabbed her instantly, pulling her under with a force she couldn't fight. Her arms flailed, her hands clawing at the water, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. The world above vanished, replaced by a murky green haze that pressed against her eyes. Her coat, heavy with water, dragged her down, and her lungs burned as she fought to hold her breath. Panic surged through her, a wild, animal instinct to survive, but so did a strange clarity that cut through the fear. Her daughter, her only child, had done this. The betrayal was a wound deeper than the cold, a pain that twisted in her chest like a knife. Her mind raced through memories, each one a fleeting image in the darkening haze. She saw Clara's first steps, wobbly and triumphant, in their cramped living room. She saw her gap-toothed smile on her 5th birthday, blowing out candles on a lopsided cake Eleanor had baked after a double shift. She saw the nights she'd stayed awake, worrying about bills, and the mornings she'd woken early to braid Clara's hair before school, her fingers deft despite their exhaustion. She'd given everything, her youth, her dreams, her strength, and yet here she was, sinking into the river's embrace, betrayed by the one person she'd loved most. Her body twisted in the current, her hands scraping against the riverbed's silt and stones. Her fingers brushed something hard, something that wasn't a rock or a branch. It was smooth, metallic, and unnaturally heavy, as if it had been waiting for her. Instinctively, she grabbed it, her hands wrapping around its edges as if it were a lifeline. It was a box, small but solid, its surface etched with patterns she couldn't see in the dim, murky water. The effort to hold it sapped what little strength she had left, but she clung to it, a final act of defiance against the river's pull. It was as if the box called to her, its weight both a burden and a promise, anchoring her in the chaos. Above, Clara stood frozen on the bank, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The splash had been louder than she'd expected, a sound that seemed to reverberate in her bones. For a moment, she stared at the water, waiting for her mother to resurface, to scream, to fight. But the river was silent, its surface rippling as if nothing had happened. Her hands shook, her mind a tangle of guilt and justification. She hadn't meant to push so hard. Or had she? The anger had been building for years. Every call, every request, every reminder of her mother's frailty had been a weight on her shoulders, a chain linking her to a childhood she'd fought to escape. She'd snapped, and now it was done. She turned away, her boots sinking into the mud as she walked back toward the path that led to town. The wind carried the faint sound of the river, a low murmur that seemed to whisper accusations. She didn't look back. She told herself it was an accident, that no one would know. The river would take care of everything, washing away her mother and her guilt. She'd go home, cry at the right moments, and play the grieving daughter. Willow Creek was a small town, but its people were too busy with their own lives to care about an old woman who'd slipped into the water. No one would suspect her, but the river had other plans. Beneath its surface, Eleanor's body stilled, her fingers locked around the strange metal box. Her last breath escaped in a stream of bubbles, rising to the surface like a whispered secret. The current carried her gently now, cradling her as if in apology for its violence. The box, too, seemed to hum with a purpose of its own, its weight anchoring her to the riverbed, refusing to let her drift away. The clouds above thickened, and a soft rain began to fall, pattering on the water's surface like tears. The river, dark and unyielding, held its secrets close, but not for long. Eleanor's death was only the beginning, and the box she'd found would soon draw the eyes of the world to this quiet, forgotten place. Clara, walking away, had no idea what she'd set in motion. The river was deceptively calm at dawn, its surface a mirror reflecting the gray light of a cold November morning. Frost clung to the grass along the banks of Willow Creek, and the air carried the sharp tang of wet earth and pine. The town, nestled in a valley where the river carved a lazy path, was still asleep, its streets quiet save for the occasional hum of a delivery truck. Henry Tate, a fisherman in his early 60s, trudged along the riverbank, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. His hands, calloused from years of hauling nets and mending lines, gripped a thermos of coffee, its warmth a small comfort against the chill. Henry was a fixture in Willow Creek, a man of few words who preferred the river's solitude to the town's gossip. He came here daily, not just for the trout, but for the quiet, a respite from the chatter of a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. This morning, though, something broke the stillness. As Henry rounded a bend where the river widened, his eyes caught a glint in the shallows, like a coin winking in the weak sunlight. He squinted, setting his thermos on a rock, and waded into the icy water, his breath hitching at the cold that seeped through his waders. He expected a lost trinket, maybe a bottle cap or a discarded fishing lure. But what he found was no ordinary debris. Half buried in the silt was a metal box, no larger than a cigar case, its surface etched with intricate symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly, as if catching light that wasn't there. It was heavy, far heavier than its size suggested, and its edges were smooth, worn by time, but unmarred by rust. Henry's heart thudded as he tugged it free, the silt releasing it with a soft, reluctant suck. Then his boot brushed something else, something soft, yielding. He looked down and froze, his breath catching in his throat. Tangled in the reeds, her pale face ghostly in the water, was Eleanor Grayson. Her gray hair fanned out like a halo, and her open eyes stared blankly at the sky, as if accusing the world above. Her hands, rigid and claw-like, still clutched the edge of the box, as if she'd refused to let go even in death. Henry stumbled back, his scream tearing through the valley's quiet, a raw, primal sound that echoed off the trees. He dropped the box on the bank, its weight thudding against the earth, and scrambled to the shore, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his phone. Within minutes, the riverbank was no longer a place of solitude. Henry's call to 911 brought sirens wailing through Willow Creek, and a crowd of early risers gathered, drawn by the commotion. They stood behind a line of yellow police tape, their whispers a low hum of shock and curiosity. "That's old Mrs. Grayson," murmured Sarah Klein, the town's librarian, her scarf clutched tightly around her neck. "Poor thing must have slipped." Others weren't so sure. "She wasn't one to wander out here," said Tom Willard, the hardware store owner, his brow furrowed. "And what's that box she was holding?" Officer Daniel Marsh, a young man in his late 20s who'd joined the Willow Creek police force only a year ago, took charge. His boyish face was pale as he knelt by Eleanor's body, now carefully laid on a tarp. Her coat was sodden, her hand still curled as if reaching for something. The metal box sat nearby, sealed in an evidence bag, its weight surprising the officer who'd carried it to the cruiser. Daniel's training told him this wasn't a simple accident. The riverbank was slippery, sure, but Eleanor's shoes showed no signs of a fall. Her soles were caked with mud, but there were no skid marks, no signs of struggle to stay upright. And the box, it was too deliberate, too out of place. He glanced at the crowd, noting their faces, wondering who might know more than they were saying. Clara was summoned to the police station by mid-morning, her face a carefully crafted mask of grief. She'd spent the night pacing her small apartment, replaying the moment she'd pushed her mother, telling herself it was an accident, that the river had taken care of everything. Now, standing in the station's sterile room, she faced Eleanor's body on a gurney, covered by a sheet. "It's her," Clara said, her voice breaking just enough to seem genuine. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her mascara smudged, but Daniel, watching from the corner, noticed the way her hands fidgeted, the way her gaze darted to the evidence bag on the table. "She must have slipped," Clara continued, unprompted. "She was always wandering too close to the river. I told her it wasn't safe." Daniel nodded, his expression neutral, but his gut told him something was off. Her tears were convincing, but there was a practiced quality to them, like an actor hitting her mark. He made a mental note to check her alibi and talk to the neighbors. "Can you tell us about this box?" he asked, gesturing to the evidence bag. Clara's eyes flickered, a momentary panic crossing her face before she masked it. "I've never seen it before," she said quickly. "She must have found it out there." Back at the station, the police pride opened the box under the watchful eyes of Chief Margaret Holt, a no-nonsense woman who'd seen her share of small-town dramas. The lid creaked, revealing a collection that took their breath away. A dozen gold coins, their surfaces stamped with unfamiliar symbols, a handful of jewels, emeralds and sapphires, that glinted even in the station's fluorescent light, and a leather-bound journal, its pages miraculously untouched by the river's damp. The journal's entries, written in a tight, elegant script, spoke of a secret society called the Order of the Saffron Veil, a group that had hidden a treasure centuries ago to protect it from invaders. The coins and jewels were only a fragment, the journal hinted, part of a larger hoard scattered along the river, with clues to its location encoded in cryptic passages. The discovery sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. Chief Holt contacted the state university, and by noon, Dr. Evelyn Harper, an archaeologist with a penchant for obscure histories, arrived with a team of graduate students. Evelyn, a wiry woman in her 50s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, examined the artifacts with reverence. "These coins predate anything we know of in this region," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "Possibly pre-Columbian, but the symbols don't match any known culture. And this journal, it's a roadmap to something bigger." She traced a finger over a page that described a saffron veil guarding a sacred cache, its location tied to the river's bends. News of the find spread like wildfire. By evening, local news crews had set up camp outside the station, their cameras flashing as they interviewed townsfolk. Sarah Klein speculated about ancient tribes, while Tom Willard spun a tale of pirates hiding loot in the 1700s. The town buzzed with excitement, its diners and bars filled with talk of treasure. Four Willow Creek, a place struggling with a shuttered mill and dwindling jobs, the discovery was a lifeline, a chance to put the town on the map. Clara watched the frenzy from her apartment, her stomach churning. She'd thrown her mother into the river to silence her, to bury her endless demands for help. Now, Eleanor's death had unearthed a fortune. The irony was bitter, but so was the fear creeping in her heart. The police were asking questions. Mrs. Klein had mentioned hearing Clara's raised voice the night before, and Tom Willard had seen her car near the river, its tires caked with mud. Worse, the journal's final entry haunted her. Those who betray the veil shall find no peace, for the river guards its own. She dismissed it as nonsense, but at night she dreamed of Eleanor's face, pale and accusing, rising from the water, her hands clutching the box. Clara's mind raced with possibilities. The journal suggested the treasure was vast, worth millions, perhaps billions. If she could decipher its clues before the archaeologists, she could disappear, start over far from Willow Creek's prying eyes. She'd always been good at puzzles, a skill honed in childhood when she'd escape her mother's nagging by solving crosswords. But the police were circling, and Daniel Marsh's questions were too pointed. She needed to act fast before the river's secrets, and her own, were fully exposed. As night fell, the riverbank was quiet again, save for the soft patter of rain. The police had cordoned off the area, but a faint glow seemed to pulse from the water, unnoticed by the officers on watch. The river, it seemed, was not done revealing its truths. The weeks following Eleanor Grayson's death transformed Willow Creek from a sleepy, struggling town into a hive of activity, its pulse quickened by the discovery of the mysterious metal box. Tents dotted the riverbank like mushrooms after a rain, where archaeologists, led by Dr. Evelyn Harper, sifted through the silt for clues to the Willow Creek hoard. The town's main street, once lined with shuttered storefronts, now bustled with news vans and tourists, their cameras flashing as they snapped photos of the river that had become a national sensation. The air carried the scent of coffee from a newly reopened diner, where locals and outsiders alike swapped theories about the treasure's origins, ancient tribes, forgotten pirates, or something stranger still. Four Willow Creek, a place battered by the closure of its paper mill a decade ago, the hoard was a lifeline, promising economic revival and a place in history. But for Clara Grayson, the discovery was a curse. The 42-year-old real estate agent sat in her cramped apartment, the blinds drawn against the town's newfound vibrancy. Her once pristine black coat hung on a chair, its hem still flecked with river mud she hadn't dared to clean. The police investigation had tightened around her like a noose. Officer Daniel Marsh, with his boyish face and relentless questions, had uncovered damning evidence. Neighbors, including Sarah Klein, the librarian, reported hearing Clara's raised voice in Eleanor's apartment the night she died. Tom Willard, the hardware store owner, had seen Clara's car parked near the riverbank, its tires caked with the same red clay found where Eleanor's body was discovered. Worst of all, a forensic team had found traces of Eleanor's DNA on Clara's discarded boots, tucked away in her garage, as if she'd hoped they'd be forgotten. Clara's nights were sleepless, haunted by dreams of her mother's pale face rising from the river, her eyes accusing, her hands clutching the metal box. The journal's final entry, which she'd glimpsed during a brief moment at the police station, echoed in her mind. Those who betray the veil shall find no peace, for the river guards its own. She dismissed it as superstition, but the words clung to her like damp air. She'd pushed her mother in a moment of blind rage, driven by years of resentment. Eleanor's endless requests for help, her frail presence a reminder of Clara's own failures. Now, the river had betrayed her, spitting out not just her mother's body, but a treasure that had turned Willow Creek's eyes on her. The police station was a gray, squat building on the edge of town, its fluorescent lights buzzing as Daniel Marsh prepared for another interview with Clara. He'd grown up in a nearby city, moving to Willow Creek to escape the chaos of urban policing, but this case had stirred something in him, a need to uncover the truth. He sat across from Clara in a sterile interrogation room, the metal box's contents spread out on a table between them. The gold coins, the glittering jewels, and the journal, now sealed in plastic to preserve its fragile pages. "Clara," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we know you were at the river that night. We have witnesses, footprints, DNA. Tell us what happened." Clara's hands fidgeted in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. She'd rehearsed her story. It was an accident, a slip, a tragedy. But under Daniel's steady gaze, her composure cracked. "It was an accident," she stammered, her voice thin. "We were arguing. She got too close to the edge. I tried to grab her. The lie faltered, her eyes darting to the journal as if it might speak for her." Daniel leaned forward, his notepad open. "Mrs. Klein heard you yelling about money. Tom saw your car. The mud on your boots matches the riverbank. Clara, this doesn't look like an accident." Her heart pounded, the room closing in. She saw her mother's face again, not the frail woman she'd pushed, but the young mother who'd braided her hair, who'd worked double shifts to buy her school books. The guilt was a weight she couldn't shake, heavier than the box Eleanor had clung to. "I didn't mean to kill her," she blurted, tears spilling down her cheeks. I snapped. She kept asking for more, always more, and I couldn't take it." The confession poured out, a flood of regret and rage, detailing the argument, the push, the moment she'd watched the river swallow her mother. Daniel listened, his pen scratching notes, his face unreadable, but his heart heavy. He'd seen crime before, but this, a daughter betraying her mother, cut deep. Clara's arrest was front-page news, eclipsing even the treasure's allure. The Willow Creek Gazette ran a headline: "Local woman charged in mother's death as river yields historic find." The town turned on Clara, their sympathy for Eleanor growing as her story emerged. A widow who'd raised her daughter alone, sacrificing everything, only to be betrayed. Sarah Klein organized a memorial at the library, where townsfolk left flowers and shared memories of Eleanor's quiet kindness. How she'd bake pies for neighbors, how she'd tutored children after school, despite her own exhaustion. Clara, meanwhile, became a pariah, her real estate signs defaced, her name whispered with scorn in the diner. The trial was a spectacle, drawing reporters from as far as Chicago. The courthouse, a brick building with creaking wooden benches, was packed with locals and outsiders. Clara sat in the defendant's chair, her face hollow, her dark hair loose for the first time in years. The prosecution painted a damning picture, a daughter driven by greed and resentment, pushing her mother into the river to escape her burdens. The defense argued it was a moment of passion, not premeditation, but the evidence, footprints, DNA, witness accounts, was overwhelming. Clara's confession sealed her fate. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning a verdict: guilty of manslaughter. The judge sentenced her to 15 years, her life unraveling as swiftly as her mother's had in the river's current. While Clara's world collapsed, the Willow Creek horde reshaped the town. Dr. Harper's team followed the journal's clues, uncovering fragments of a lost civilization along the river. Pottery shards, stone tools, and more coins, all bearing the same cryptic symbols. The journal described the Order of the Saffron Veil, a secretive group that had guarded a sacred treasure centuries ago, possibly linked to a pre-Columbian culture that had vanished without a trace. The final discovery came a month after Clara's trial, when divers found a hidden chamber beneath the riverbed, accessible only at low tide. Inside was a golden statue, 3 feet tall, of a figure draped in a saffron veil, its eyes inlaid with emeralds that seemed to glow. Evelyn called it a masterpiece, proof of a culture unknown to modern scholars, and it was hailed as the centerpiece of the hoard. The statue was moved to a museum in the state capital, where it drew thousands of visitors. Willow Creek became a tourist destination, its economy revived by gift shops, guided tours, and a new riverfront cafe named Eleanor's Place in honor of the woman whose death had sparked it all. A plaque was erected by the river, simple but poignant: Eleanor Grayson, whose sacrifice brought light to the past. The town embraced her memory, her story woven into the Horde's legend, while Clara's name faded into infamy. In her cell, Clara read about the statue in a newspaper, her fingers tracing the grainy photo. She saw her mother's face in every shadow, heard her voice in every gust of wind that rattled the prison bars. The journal's curse seemed real now. No peace, only the weight of her actions. She'd hoped to claim the treasure, to escape Willow Creek's grip, but the river had other plans. It had guarded its secrets, using Eleanor's death to reveal them and Clara's betrayal to seal her fate. The river itself remained, flowing quietly through Willow Creek, its surface hiding depths no one fully understood. At night, some swore they saw a faint glow beneath the water, where Eleanor had sunk. Others whispered of dreams, a veiled figure standing on the bank, watching, waiting. The river, it seemed, was not done with its secrets, and Willow Creek would never be the same.